Hello, everybody. Welcome to Appreciating Poetry. I'm your host, Dr. Kelly. Uh, I don't know how uh, frequently you check in here, but if you check in frequently, you may know that I've missed a couple of weeks because I had a little bout of COVID. You hear that my voice is, that would be COVID-19. You hear that my voice is a little raspy still. Um, so we'll see what happens. um, I feel fine. Thanks for asking. Um, so for the last few weeks, we have been looking at some poems by William Wordsworth. And they're the poems, some of the poems by Wordsworth uh, that involve social criticism, that Wordsworth looks at the world of people and he finds that it is um, dysfunctional in some way. So we looked at uh, London 1802, in which Wordsworth imagines that England is so impoverished culturally, morally, that it needs the resurrection of John Milton, author of Paradise Lost, to come back and give us manners, virtue, freedom, and power. And then we looked at a somewhat more Wordsworthian poem, I think, uh, uh, is Too Much With Us, in which it is very clear that the dysfunction in the world is caused by greed, caused by selfishness, caused by these moral defects that seem to be characteristic of the modern world. And the poet wishes that he could go to the prehistoric world and see ancient nature gods come back and regenerate the earth. I think that's a slightly more Wordsworthian poem because instead of focusing so much on social institutions the way London 1802 did, that is to say, altar, sword, pen, the heroic wealth of Hall and Bower, the church, the aristocracy, etc. Instead of looking at those, Wordsworth situates himself in a natural environment, looks out over the sea and sees the sea bearing her bosom to the moon. Um, so this is the typical Wordsworthian note, the very intimate relationship with nature. Now, uh, Wordsworth's probably most, shall we say, straightforward statement of, of the dysfunction of the social world and the healing power of nature. The poem that most characteristically, most directly expresses that tension, that conflict really, between the world that humans have made and the world of nature is a poem entitled with the rather absurd title, Lines Composed a Few Miles Above Tintern Abbey Upon Revisiting the Banks of the Wye During a Tour, July 13th, 1798. And so nobody, uh, remembers the title. I'm not sure that I just recited it accurately. It's known to history as Tintern Abbey. Um, and Tintern Abbey is on the border between England and Wales. Tintern Abbey is one of the abbeys that was shut down in the 16th century by Henry VIII, and it fell into ruins. And in the late 18th century, it became very fashionable to visit ruins. Now, the poem that we know of as Tintern Abbey doesn't mention Tintern Abbey at all. Instead, um, the speaker of the poem, the speaker of the poem, who's a autobiographical image of the poet William Wordsworth, um, is standing at a high place overlooking the River Wye and looking out over the farmland that makes up the landscape. And so this gives him a chance to describe the landscape some, although that description is shall we say, highly plastic. The description is highly distorted. The description is shaped by present feelings of the speaker and also memories. The speaker visited here before 5 years earlier. Against that natural description, which is just Wordsworth's great contribution to poetry in English, is his feelings about how bad he feels when he's not around nature, although he says he's able to carry the memories of nature away from him. So these are the two impulses in the poem. On the one hand, you've got the healing power of nature. On the other hand, you've got the wounding power of human society. And so what we're going to look at today is that conflict. So I'm going to look at some famous lines from the poem. It's a pretty hefty chunk of poetry. It's about 200 lines of iambic pentameter. That is 10-syllable lines. This is unrhymed iambic pentameter. That's iambic pentameter. Don't worry about that technical. It's just a way of organizing a line of poetry. And it's the verse form that was used in I should say it's the line form that was used in the 14th century by Geoffrey Chaucer. It was used in the 16th century by the Elizabethan playwrights, notably Christopher Marlowe and William Shakespeare brought it into the 17th century. Then in the later 17th century, it was used in the epic poem Paradise Lost by John Milton. So now, back in the 14th century, Geoffrey Chaucer used rhymed pairs of iambic pentameter line. That was very popular in the 14th century, also very popular in the 18th century. But the iambic pentameter that we're most familiar with, because it's the language of theater in English, and actors know how to use the alternating stressed and unstressed syllables to give intonation to the lines. So the most famous iambic pentameter, I think, is Shakespeare's unrhymed iambic pentameter. And then for reasons that are not immediately obvious, when John Milton came around to write a religious poem, an epic poem about the fall of man in the latter half of the 17th century, Milton used this theatrical language, this theatrical verse unrhymed iambic pentameter for his religious epic poem. Then, in the very late 18th century, 1798, and then into the 19th century, William Wordsworth was a great practitioner of this unrhymed iambic pentameter. So it has a kind of pedestrian feel to it that Wordsworth would take these unbelievably long walks. I mean, so uh, he walks the length of the River Wye in a few days, and during that time, he composes in his mind this 200 line poem called known to history as Tintern Abbey. He got really good at just walking and looking and and composing. Um, and then apparently he would just write it down. He just learned how to taught himself how to think in blank verse. So what we're going to look at is this conflict between man and nature in Tintern Abbey. So first thing, these are just little excerpts from various parts of the poem. First thing we're going to look at, these beauteous forms. Okay, so these natural shapes that I see as I look down from a high place over the river and then beyond the river to the farmland. These beauteous forms, through a long absence, have not been to me as is a landscape to a blind man's eye. That's a very strange simile. Um, so, um, these beauteous forms, these things that I'm looking at right now, the trees and the rocks and the river and farmland, these beauteous forms, through a long absence, have not been to me as is a landscape to a blind man's eye. So I've been gone for 5 years. I'm coming back to this same place. I'm looking at the same view I looked at 5 years ago, but during the 5 years of my absence, he doesn't say I've seen the landscape in my memory. What he says has not been as is a landscape to a blind man's eye. Very strange. And Wordsworth loves these sort of double negative constructions. Had not been like sightlessness. Um, Gosh, and what does he mean by that? I mean, he means I've seen it, but why express it in this doubly negative way? I think it's that Wordsworth is a very egotistical guy. I mean, social critics and lovers of nature both tend to be fairly, they tend to think, not without reason, that they've got, their finger on the pulse, that they know something that maybe is not generally known. And it's easy to imagine that uh, these feelings, these thoughts are not generally known because large groups of people can be pretty awful, as we're going to see here. I mean, lots of people feel great refreshment getting out of the city, taking a walk in the countryside. Um, so it's not so much that I have been not unable to see these forms while I was away, uh, but that I've had a sensitivity to these forms, both in the first place and in their remembered forms, that's not universal, that not everybody appreciates this view. So I think the blind man here is not so much someone who is sightless as someone who is insensitive to sensory experience into the beauties of nature. So I've been away, and these beauteous forms have not been to me as a landscape to a blind man's eye, but oft, and here's the city, and it's terrible, in lonely rooms, and mid the din of towns and cities, I have owed to them in hours of weariness sensations sweet. So you're in a lonely room, there's people all over the place, but you're behind four walls, and you can hear the noise from the street. I must tell you, my friends, I can relate. I live fairly close to the freeway, and all the time I hear people being just so fast and so furious with their noisy cars. Um, hmm, and, I don't even live in the city, I live in the suburbs. So I hear those damn leaf blowers. I mean, I see where he's coming from. The din of towns and cities. But I have owed to them, to these beauteous forms, in hours of weariness, sensation sweet. So what do we got? In the non-natural world, in the world where humans live, we've got loneliness first and foremost, right? This crowd of people and nobody is interacting, at least not in a friendly way. Or we're set apart from them, and we're blocked off. We're behind four walls. So first, loneliness. Secondly, noise. Noise and annoyance. That's the same word. And weariness. Oh, so tired, just crossing the street. Uh, but in hours of weariness, I've owed to these beauteous forms sweet sensations. I love this. Felt in the blood, felt along the heart. You might think felt along the blood, felt in the heart, because you think of our blood vessels as these long things. Um, Again, this is just this is really good poetry writing. It seems to me characteristically Wordsworthian, that felt along the heart. This is just something that I just love about poetry. And it's like, man, how do you come up with along the heart? Felt the whole length of my heart. Um, so then I got to say, oh, that's strange. So now I just speculate, right? I don't know the answer. Uh, if you want to send me a message and tell me what you think about felt along the heart, please, that would be wonderful. In the meantime, I'll tell you what I think, and please understand, this is, we can't phone up Wordsworth. Hey, what did you mean? And by the way, don't ever ask an author, what did you mean? I mean, if the author is a reasonable person, the author won't say what I meant was something other than what I wrote, right? So, what did you mean by that? Well, I meant what I said. I said I felt sweet sensations along the heart. So, why along? I guess because the heart isn't just a little package, right? The heart is connected to other people, and the heart is connected to the past. And I think that's the main thing that Wordsworth is talking about, because Wordsworth is the poet of memory. He's the poet of nature, but he's the poet of emotion recollected in tranquility. So I think felt in the blood, in the present, and felt along the heart, reaching back into past feelings and passing even into my purer mind. Now, here's a little solecism, a little error, I suppose, that an editor might complain of. Purer than what? right? So this is an error called uncompared comparative, right? I can't just tell you that William the Refrigerator Perry, gigantic defensive lineman for the Chicago Bears in the 1980s, was bigger than what? Passing even into my purer mind, purer than what? Again, Wordsworth put the comparative in there. So he's comparing his mind or part of his mind uh, uh, to some other part of his mind on point of purity. So the purer mind, well, what is the purer mind? I guess I guess to be perfectly frank, I think it's something I disapprove of, which is the binarism of mind and body. I mean, now, the fact that mind can be subjected to a comparative, I think is a step in the right direction. But I don't like a mind-body duality. That's just silly. Obviously, uh, uh, our mind, our cognitive dimension, our subjective dimension, is related to like our brain, our nervous system, our physical being. So mind body, I mean, that a lot of folks still subscribe to that, but I'm on a campaign to stamp out binary thinking. But I think regrettably, what Wordsworth means here is the mind as free as possible from the body, a purer mind, right? So there's this idea that there's dead matter, kind of corrupt matter, it's like lead, it's like a base metal. And then there's gold, the pure metal. See, gold doesn't tarnish, has something to do with chemical properties of gold. Sorry to get alchemical here with you, but uh, I'm not into alchemy because it relies on this duality, this symbolic binarism of lead and gold. I think what Wordsworth means by his pure mind is the mind as free as possible from matter, specifically from the body. And I have to say, that's a major note as we go into the 19th century. 19th century is famous for being kind of prudish now. I know that there's plenty of, I mean, people had sex in the 19th century. My proof of that is the fact that I'm here. So somebody in the 19th century had to have sex. Um, However, uh, references, I mean, there's not a lot of references to, shall we say, the physical dimension in Wordsworth. So I kind of think he means purer mind, purer than that mind, which is sort of stuck in physicality. Okay, but here's the really important note. Through a long absence, when I've been lonely and annoyed and weary, sweet sensations from these beauteous forms of nature I've felt them. I've felt these sensations in the blood, along the heart, into my purer mind with tranquil restoration. So these forms pass into my mind with tranquil restoration. I love the phrase tranquil restoration because it implies, it kind of, it's one of those interchangeable phrases. right? That the restoration is tranquil, but the tranquility is restorative. Okay. Wordsworth gives several conflicting definitions of poetry, but the most famous and the one that's most characteristically him is emotion recollected in tranquility. And so the pleasant emotions, the sweet sensations that he derives from the beauteous forms of nature restore with tranquility or tranquilize with the restoration. All right. So then he gets in this blessed mood, right? So the tranquil restoration results in this. I mean, it's not cause and effect, but the tranquil restoration passes into a particular mood in which the burden of the mystery, and I'll get to that too in a minute, in which the heavy and the weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lightened. Oh man, that's good. So the heavy and the weary weight of the world. So we've seen the weariness and we can imagine the heaviness, the weight of the world, which is responsibilities and this I don't know, maybe I'm making it 2024 instead of 1798, but I think this is the modern world where you're just constantly on your guard. You just have to constantly uh, get ready to jump out of the way of something horrible. Um, and that's very wearisome. I mean, it just wears you out of all this unintelligible world now. Wordsworth's use of the word world is so unusual. Remember, the world is too much with us. Late and soon, getting and spending, we lay waste our power. Right? So when he says the world, he doesn't mean the world of nature. He means the world as it has been domesticated by humans. And it just doesn't make any sense. It's just unintelligible. And that's a burden. That's a burden. The mystery, the unintelligibility of the human world. I mean, why are people so terrible? Okay, now, friends, every person is valuable. I say that because every person is capable of responding to reasons. Every person is capable of accepting the facts of reality. And the facts of reality gives us reasons for action, right? I mean, people need food, clothing, and shelter. So we committed, we Homo sapiens, we committed to technology a couple of 100,000 years ago. I mean, lots of other animals use technology, but there is none that is as dependent on technology as humans. Um, and so the technological world, just when we think about the various technological revolutions that have taken place, from the Neolithic age, which was revolutionary, the Iron Age, which was revolutionary, the agricultural revolution, which was revolution, and the industrial revolution, which is underway, as Wordsworth writes this poem. In America, think of the Industrial Revolution as a sort of mid-19th century thing, but uh, the southern states in the United States with their peculiar institution of slavery, they were feeding the textile industry in Britain as Wordsworth was writing this poem. So there are textile mills in Manchester in 1798. There are steam engines all over the place before the beginning of the 19th century. And so, so when you live through one of these technological revolutions, I admit they're sort of sporadic, but we're living through one now. I mean, yeah, there was a phrase that was kind of trendy when I was young, and that is future shock, right? And so, um, everybody knew when I was a child. I was born in 1954. Everybody knew when I was a child that the United States had used nuclear weapons, the atomic bomb, we called it, uh, at the end of World War II. But man, when the Soviet Union brought nuclear weapons to Cuba, 90 miles from the United States, man, it got real. And it was terrifying. Uh, so there was the nuclear revolution. And yeah. And so now we're going through a digital revolution, and I'm, there's certainly a lot of good things about it, but it can also be pretty terrifying. Um, I mean, who's controlling all of this technology? All right. So when Wordsworth says the world, he means the world that humans have made. We know this from the world is too much with us. Late and soon, getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. But the tranquil restoration of nature, the healing power of nature, lightens the heavy and the weary weight of all this unintelligible world. All right. So here we have, so notice beauteous forms, loneliness, noise, weariness, and tranquil restoration. Here we have a blessed mood, the burden of the mystery, the weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lightened. So, the what Wordsworth calls the world, what I'm calling um, the social situation that is brought about by technological change. Um, Wordsworth is claiming that nature provides an alternative. Yet another one. How oft in darkness and amid the many shapes of joyless daylight. Ah, so good. Why is that so good? Because we got an and on one side of the and we've got darkness. On the other side of the and we've got amid the many shapes of joyless daylight. Didn't say darkness and daylight. He said darkness. You don't see anything. There's nothing there. And amid the many shapes of joyless daylight, right? So you see all this stuff, but there's no joy in it. Shapes, not beauteous forms, just many shapes. This sounds like Hamlet, when the fretful stir unprofitable and the fever of the world have hung upon the beatings of my heart, the fever of the world. The fretful stir, unprofitable, have hung upon the beatings of my heart, have weighed me down. How oft in spirit have I turned to thee, O Sylvan Y. That's the name of this river that he's been walking down. How oft in spirit have I turned to thee, O Sylvan Y, thou wanderer through the woods. Oh, I know it does you no good for me to go, ah. And I guess what I'm supposed to do is explain why I'm going, ah. There's a lot of good stuff in this. So I think I'll get a little technical, and talk about a particular uh, figure of speech. I think, I don't know if I can say the most basic figure of speech, but sort of the the most typical figure of speech is metaphor. Uh, I just mentioned a few minutes ago William the Refrigerator Perry, who was just an enormous football player in the 1980s. I just love the fact that he was called the refrigerator because he's just so big, so immobile. Uh, it's a his nickname is a lovely metaphor. So maybe you can see that personification is a metaphor. The standard school book example of personification is the wind whispered in the trees, right? People whisper, wind doesn't whisper. So you can surely see that that's a metaphor, that wind is a person and this person does something, or this person has some personality. So personification is a kind of derivative, I guess, of metaphor. Now, if I create a personification, so it's not just the whisperer, it's it's a more complicated personification than that. So if I create a personification and then start talking to it like it's a character, that's that's a pretty complicated figure of speech, and that's what we've got here. So the name of that figure of speech is apostrophe, same as that little thing in possessives and contractions, that little orthographic symbol, apostrophe. It means something like turning aside or something like that. But etymology and definition are not the same thing. Apostrophe means address to a personification. So, so I have turned to thee. Now, if you write poetry in 2024, stay away from the thee and thou. It's not natural for us anymore. We don't call our beloved thou, which is too bad, really. But that's the way it is. But I hope you can understand that just like tu in qui in French and tu in Spanish and du in German, these are all related. We have thou in English, and that contrasts with vous, plural, usted, plural, and sie, plural in German. So when we address somebody directly in the second person, singular, that's the intimate form of address. And this is a very striking feature of Wordsworth, not merely that Wordsworth expresses all of these strong feelings toward nature, but that his relationship with nature is so intimate. And so nature here, or rather the river, one particular natural feature, is personified. and the speaker addresses it as thou. In the objective case, that's thee to the object of a preposition, thee. And then, sorry for the technicalities, but maybe they'll help. So, oh, by the way, in ancient poetry, O was the not OH, but just O was sort of the sign of apostrophe. O Sylvan Y. Now then, we have the Y with an adjective Sylvan, and then we have Y with a noun wanderer. Uh, and this is just a complicated, really high quality line of poetry right here. Let me check the syllables. Oh, Sylvan, why the wanderer through the woods? Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 syllables. So Wordsworth is cheating a little bit. I don't know why he said THRO apostrophe. I don't know. But wanderer, see what I did there? You have to kind of pronounce it with two syllables to make the line scan, to make it iambic pentameter. But my point is not about the line. It's about Sylvan Y wanderer. So the Y is the name of the river. And Sylvan is what's called an epithet. Epithet. An epithet is, sometimes kings and heroes and stuff get epithets. So, Frederick the Great, the Great, Alexander the Great. There's lots of the Great, Charlemagne the Great. So the Great is an epithet. Sometimes they're kind of funny, right? Like Pippin the Short, um, uh, Charles the Bald. So an epithet is one of these uh, little descriptive add-ons to a name. It's kind of an alternative name. So instead of saying Frederick the Great, I could just sort of say the Great. So that's how epithets work. Now, in epic poetry, going way back, uh, literally to prehistory, lots of epithets. So Achilles in the Iliad is called the tamer of horses. Uh, Sometimes just the fast runner. Milton was really good with epithets. So there's a pagan god named Moloch who shows up as a demon in Paradise Lost, and Milton calls him Moloch Homicide. That's pretty great. So, oh, Sylvan Y. Now, Silva in Latin means forest. Oh, forested Y. So Pennsylvania is William Penn's forest. Sylvia is the name of a forest nymph. Is she a nymph? Well, so Sylvan Y, forested, woody Y. See, but Sylvan, that little archaic note there makes the epithet a little more lofty, a little more, elevated. Means same thing as lofty. Oh, Sylvan Y, thou wanderer through the woods. So Sylvan means of the woods, wanderer means wander. So right, so the Y is not just a river. I mean, we think of a river. I grew up next to the great Mighty St. John's. There's an epithet for you in North Florida. And there it is. It's just the river, right? But he's thinking about the river flowing, and he's identifying with the river, right? Wordsworth is a wanderer. So thou wanderer through the woods. Woods is the same as sylvan, see? So it's just this kind of intricate little package addressing the river, talking to the river as if it were going to answer back. How often, Spirit, have I turned to thee, O sylvan, why thou wanderer through the woods? I don't know what time I started, friends. I think this lesson's going a little long. For nature can so inform the mind that is within us. And I really think he means form within the mind that is within us. So impressed with quietness and beauty against the din of the towns of cities. So feed with lofty thoughts that, and here's all the bad stuff, neither evil tongues, rash judgments, nor the sneers of selfish men. Selfish, that's the worst thing for Wordsworth. And remember, we are selfish men. And the world is too much with us. Nor, oh, this is so good, nor greetings where no kindness is, you know? How you doing? Nor all the dreary intercourse of daily life. So sad. Words expand and contract their meaning. So the word intercourse has contracted its meaning. I guess we would say interaction today. The dreary intercourse of daily life, right? We're interacting with people, but we're not entering into a relationship with them. Shall e'er prevail against us, nor disturb our cheerful fate, that all which we behold is full of blessings. Now that's a pretty drastic statement coming after evil tongues, rash judgments, there's the selfish men, greetings, where no kindness is, dreary intercourse of daily life. But I think this is really important that Wordsworth ends this with, all which we behold is full of blessings. Even the nasty stuff in the city that he's so relieved to get away from. If the mind that is within us is informed by nature and impressed with quietness and beauty, then you can see that everything is in fact beautiful, that everything is in fact nature, even though humans modify natural objects for human use. That's what technology means. So that if we're properly educated by nature, then we can see beauty in everything, and understand that the sneers of selfish men or greetings where no kindness this is just blindness. This is just ignorance. They just don't know any better. They know not what they do. So this is a great poem. And so we're going to look next time at what it is about nature that gives her this restorative power, this healing power. I think I went a little long today, but sorry. I'll see you next time. Thanks.